This one might be a little bizarre. There's a few reasons we could bring up JoJo's Bizarre Adventure right now. Hirohiko Araki's birthday was June 7th. I know it's a little late, but if there's anyone who understands late releases, it's Araki. There was a 4-year hiatus between JoJo Part 5 and JoJo Part 6. It's also an anime that resonates with a lot of different queer folk. Although there's a lot of little jokes and references that could be seen as problematic to some, I personally always find it more funny than demeaning. Also, as of April 2024, the manga has released over 134 volumes. That's even more than One Piece at 108. Based on how you guys responded to the Star Wars video Bree and I did, we want to give you projects that are more in normal watch time, around 20 minutes. That being said, enjoy. Be sure to like and subscribe now. Just ring my bell to turn on notifications. I gotta admit, I actually really love the dramatic, over-the-top style of storytelling that is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and I've been going through it all from the beginning recently because of Stone Ocean and Steel Ball Run. There's a lot I could go on about for this anime, from the art style and the use of color, to all the queer coding, to the complete overhaul of the magic system between parts 2 and 3. But to start, let's first talk about this piece. Watching JoJo from the beginning again while I was coloring one of Sherlock's pictures of Monomath's villain, it was giving so much Dio Brando that I just couldn't help but want to make that thought into an actual art piece. So that's what I did. Other JoJo enjoyers like me instantly recognized the pose from the opening of Phantom Blood. He's got the Dio look with a book instead of the mask that turned Dio into a vampire. But both of these are built on powerful undead magic and a creepy face aesthetic. Dio is a powerful, terrifying enemy that gets his start as the child of an abusive man who was later adopted into the Joestar family. So that's what I'm working with here. A concept that sort of rewrites bits of the JoJo story with these characters in place. One thing that I wanted to do was work with the color of the JoJo characters. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a seinen manga written by Hirohiko Araki, an ongoing series that has been in production since 1987. It was originally serialized in Shueisha's shonen manga magazine Weekly Shonen Jump from 1987 to 2004, and was transferred to the monthly seinen manga magazine Ultra Jump in 2005. The series is divided into a total of 9 story arcs, each following a new protagonist bearing the JoJo nickname. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is the largest ongoing manga series published by Shueisha by number of volumes, with its chapters collected in 134 tankobon volumes as of April 2024. The universe of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a reflection of the real world with an added existence of supernatural forces and beings. That's similar to what we do as well. Historical fiction with a blend of fantasy elements like magic or dragons. In the JoJo setting, some people are capable of transforming their inner spiritual power into a stand, but since that doesn't appear until part 3, we're not getting into stands today. Another significant form of energy is Hammon, a martial arts technique that allows its user to focus bodily energy into sunlight via controlled breathing. Demon Slayer has a similar sort of power system, and I'll get an explanation of Hammon a little bit later. The narrative of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is split into parts with independent stories and different characters. Each of the series' protagonists is a member of the Joestar family, whose mainline descendants possess a star-shaped birthmark above their left shoulder blade, and a name that can be abbreviated to the titular JoJo. The first 6 parts take place within a single continuity, whose generational conflict stems from the rivalry between Jonathan Joestar and Dio Brando, while the later 3 parts take place in an alternate universe where the Joestar family tree is heavily altered. This style of storytelling is called the family saga. The family saga is a genre of literature which chronicles the lives and deeds of a family, or a number of related or interconnected families over a period of time. In stories with a serious intent, this is often a thematic device used to portray particular historical events, changes of societal circumstances, or the ebb and flow of fortunes from a multitude of perspectives. For instance, think about Bree and I come from the future. Martin lives in the year 3000, but we're in the 2500s. You'll get to meet everyone in my family eventually, for as long as the saga continues. Now, the word saga comes from Old Norse, where it meant what is said, an utterance, oral account, and notification, and a structured narrative. It's a story about a specific person, and was originally borrowed into English from Old Norse by scholars in the 18th century to refer to the Old Norse prose narratives known as sagas. Some other prominent examples of this type of fiction: Holes by Louis Sachar and Homestuck by Andrew Hussey. Roots, the Saga of an American Family by Alex Haley, is a historical fiction that follows the story of a captured African slave and follows his descendants all the way up to the author himself. Wait, if this starts in Scotland and goes all the way up to where I'm part of the story, are we doing our Roots right now? Game of Thrones is another one that follows this. Specifically Fire and Blood, also The Silmarillion by Tolkien, and The Witcher by Andrzej Sapkowski. A lot of those series were a big inspiration for this one, and it's awesome that I get to tell you the story of my family and the families that connect to mine. But now, back to this. Phantom Blood, also known as JoJo Part 1, takes place in the late 19th century England, where Jonathan Joestar, the son of a wealthy landowner, meets his newly adopted brother, Dio Brando. Dio hates Jonathan and is constantly looking for ways to usurp his place in the Joestar family. So, similarly, we have our villain Jack. In a more Tales of Atonement style retelling of this, I would say that it's Jack who comes to Alden instead of Madeline, and is adopted by the Riddell line. Martin would, of course, see Jack just like any other brother, despite his conniving efforts to supplant his place in the family. In Phantom Blood, Dio was always more powerful than Jonathan, and was usually able to best him in combat prowess. But I can't give that to Jack and Martin, even if they were raised together. Instead, it would be Jack's intelligence and skill with magic that he would work hard to ingratiate himself to the Riddell home and Alden, while trying to make Martin look like an oaf and a joke. Unfortunately for Jack, there aren't many people in Alden, even without the Rose family. that would actually turn on Martin. A fact that would enrage Jack and lead him down a road to ruin, much like it did Dio. However, Dio turned himself into a vampire during Phantom Blood by use of an ancient stone mask that was originally hung as an ornamental art piece in the Joestar estate. This gave him a variety of powers like immortality and near invulnerability. Dio was able to put himself together after being literally cut in half. For Jack, that artifact would be the Necronomicon, a book written in an unknown time in a variety of languages, mostly Sumerian and inscribed with ancient, demonic, and otherworldly symbols. This book and its gruesome appearance would grant Jack terrifying eldritch power and a command over undead magic. Not a vampire, but a necromancer, and possibly eventually a lich. But what exactly is the Necronomicon? What does it all mean? The Necronomicon, also referred to as the Book of the Dead, or under a purported original Arabic title of Kitab al-Azif, is a fictional grimoire appearing in stories by the horror writer H.P. Lovecraft and his followers. It was first mentioned in Lovecraft's 1924 short story, The Hound. There is a ton of very problematic stuff surrounding Lovecraft. He was a racist and a horrible xenophobe. The naming conventions he used for some of his characters in his novels smacks of a Cho Chang, Kingsley Shacklebolt kind of vibe, and I won't even get into what he called his cat because I'm sure it would get me demonetized. So about the Necronomicon. According to Lovecraft, he came up with the name of it in a dream, and he interprets it as coming from the Greek language nekros, nomos, ekon. Dead, law, and image, thus meaning an image of the law of the dead. St. Joshi notes that Lovecraft's own etymology is unsound. The last portion of it is particularly erroneous, since ekon is nothing more than a neuter adjectival suffix and has nothing to do with akon. Basically, Lovecraft didn't know as much Greek as he thought he did. Oops. But, so the supposed fictional author of the Necronomicon is one Abdul al-Hazred, known as a half-crazed Arab, said to be the worshipper of the Lovecraftian entities Yog, Sothoth, and Cthulhu, sometime in the early 7th century. And this is what I was talking about with the naming conventions, though. Abdul al-Hazred isn't even grammatically correct for an Arab name. What is transliterated as Abdul in English is the noun for servant, Abdu, and of, al. So the name roughly translates to servant of the. Al-Hazred is mostly considered a corruption of the word al-Hadarat, meaning the presences. TLDR, it's not a real Arabic name, follows none of the Arabic naming conventions, and was apparently something Lovecraft invented to call himself when he was only 5 years old. In Arabic translations of Lovecraft, Abdul is called Abdullah al-Hazrad, so we're going with that. Abdullah is described as being from Sana'a in Yemen. He visited the ruins of Babylon, the subterranean secrets of Memphis, and the empty quarter of Arabia. According to the history, He lived his last years in Damascus, where he wrote the Necronomicon and later died under mysterious circumstances. The Necronomicon turns up again in the 950s, the 1050s, and again in at 1228, but it vanishes after that until around 1588. And so that's where Jack having the book comes in, between the late 1200s and the early 1300s. Using the Necronomicon and its powers, Jack would lay waste to Alden and emerge as a supreme force for Martin to reckon with, just as Dio did with the power of the stone mask. The battle would have to end in a decisive victory, and for Phantom Blood this resulted in not only Dio's defeat, but also Jonathan's death. Note that I said defeat. That's because, like any really good and terrible villain, Dio can't be bested so easily and turns up not only once but twice more in the series to try and destroy the Joestar line and rules. Jack as a surrogate for Dio is depicted as sitting on a throne with the book in place of the mask. Also, with each of these pictures, of which there's 3, I wanted to try and mimic a background as close as possible. With Dio, he's sitting on this throne, and there's a lot of engravings and shadows. I mimic that here with some symbols I found that are meant to be demonic lettering. And down at the bottom, well, that's just Paradise Lost. All these elements together paint Jack as a man condemned by God in his pursuit of power. Hubris eliciting hamartia. Seeing Martin through Jack's eyes, Jack sees himself as the hero, and Martin as the brutish northern barbarian. So, what about Martin as Jonathan? I think between all 3 of them, Jack's outfit changed the most. We did allow for the artist to take a little creative freedom to really try to capture the JoJo style. Stuff like a half cape or mantle rather than a full cloak, and his upper chest being exposed are changes to the original character design, but really help sell the JoJo aesthetic. That's important. Why is exposed skin so important to Araki, though? Overall, the unique fashion sense of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure characters is an integral part of the series, visual style, and storytelling. It reflects the creativity and individuality of the series' creator, as well as the distinct personalities and backstories of each character. You always know who the important characters are in JoJo right off the bat. I don't know, maybe it's the blonde, but to me Martin looks the most like Giorno here, where Jack really seems like he was based more on Bucciarati. That really makes this scene extremely comical in my head. One of the most obvious differences between the parts for different JoJo adventures is the changing art style. It's something that Araki gets asked about a lot, and fans speculate on things like maybe the original art wasn't popular, but it was, or that the newer designs were specifically to make the characters look more iconic, even more queer-coded. But actually, it's a really mundane reason. Araki's art style keeps evolving with the times. He said in a 2022 interview with Vogue Plus in China, quote, "I think it's because of how the times have changed. In the 80s, main characters were drawn as the embodiment of adventure, with muscular bodies and strong features. However, when I came up with the concept of inner power in the 90s, the bodies of the main characters started becoming more normal-sized, around 5'7" to 5'9". Height is actually used a lot in Japanese media to denote the difference between a hero and a villain. Dio is taller than Jonathan. Sephiroth is taller than Cloud. Throughout Dragon Ball, all of Goku's actual enemies are taller than he is. This is usually for a few reasons depending on the author. Maybe to display a sort of coming-of-age story where a young person faces off against adults to change the systems of generational oppression. Maybe it's just to make the villain more intimidating, like Captain Hook and Peter Pan. Oftentimes it's because the narrative wants us to see the villain as a peak. Height in men is used as a conventional beauty standard, and often men who are short are taken less seriously, or shortness may be played off as a joke or body shaming. These are aspects I think are fine for villains to possess, because we're supposed to dislike the villain. We should want the hero and their ideals to triumph, right? This is especially true for villains like Dio, who are promoted as being more manly than our titular JoJo, and the source of his anguish. For us, it's actually the opposite, at least as far as height goes. Jack, being mostly English, is actually a good couple inches shorter than Martin, around 5'6", the same as Madeline. But for Martin, for his time, he tops out around 5'11". Remember, Normans, Gauls, Scottish folk were all fairly tall, especially when compared to Irish people at the time. I say that to point out that Martin and Shane are both half Irish on Tassandra's side, so it's only due to that they aren't much taller. While he was drawn with his sword, I have this really high-res version that was done by Satch on Fiverr, that I'm really big on using for appearance of the weapon in my art. So instead of going through the coloring and shading it all, I opted for the fully finished one. So here's the idea. Part 1, Jonathan Joestar doesn't use a stand, and that's why I decided originally to base these on Phantom Blood rather than the later parts. Jonathan uses a sword to fight Dio in Part 1, so that explains the pose. It's a pretty iconic stance where Jonathan is confronting Dio in the Joestar castle. So if not the power of stands, we're focusing on the magic energy that was used all through Phantom Blood and Part 2, Hammon. In JoJo, Hammon is a magical energy kind of like Dragon Ball Ki, Naruto Chakra, etc. The characters can use Hammon to do a variety of things, and Jonathan's sword works as a conduit for his Hammon. So why couldn't Martin's sword do the same? In this hypothetical crossover, Martin could use Hammon through his sword to manifest one of the 7 basic elements of our series canon: fire, water, air, earth, nature, spirit, and void. And I think in typical Araki fashion, his entire color palette would change to reflect this. Color is both extremely important for Araki's style, but also completely irrelevant at the same time. What that all means is, there's no canon colors for JoJo characters. Most of the time, characters with manga are completely black and white, with only exception being like cover art, but that varies. Even in the anime, colors sometimes vary from scene to scene, like this part in Stardust Crusaders when Jotaro, that season's JoJo, and Kakyoin straight up trade color schemes. This is done in a way to illustrate how they are each other's antagonists, and it's one way that, at least in the anime, Araki tells us more about the world around these guys. Or, like it is in Diamond is Unbreakable, sometimes the sky is just yellow because Araki wanted the sky to be yellow. If you take that into account, I suppose I could have used any color I wanted, but I wanted the characters to be immediately recognizable. But in order to really drive home that JoJo aesthetic, I went with a very high saturation version of the colors I normally use. This comes from Araki's inspiration, Paul Gauguin. Gauguin was a French painter, sculptor, printmaker, ceramist, and writer whose work has been primarily associated with the post-impressionist and symbolist movements. He was also an influential practitioner of wood engraving and woodcuts as art forms. While only moderately successful during his lifetime, Gauguin has since been recognized for his experimental use of color, syntheticist style that were distinct from Impressionism. Syntheticism was known for its flat areas of color and bold outlines, which can be seen through Araki's later works. During a lecture, Araki stated that he was fond of Gauguin since he was a child, and eventually used Gauguin's Impressionist and Post-Impressionist pieces as inspirations for his later work. What inspired Araki the most about Gauguin's work was the use of color blocking and the lively use of unrealistic color. He appreciated the idea that the ground could be pink and the trees could be blue. Using Impressionism for a piece like this, I could make Martin's eyes and hair both yellow, throw in blue or green, and even change the colors entirely until the only recognizable part of Martin was the outline. With all these pieces together, how would a Phantom Blood story play out with Martin, Jack, and Aimo? Following the story of Phantom Blood, Martin would leave Alden and train abroad, forming a group of teachers, mentors, and allies that would teach him all about the use of Hammon. With his body fully enhanced in his mastery of Hammon breathing techniques, Martin would return to take revenge on Jack much the same way Jonathan took revenge on Dio. They would fight. Martin would use his sword, and Jack would use the power of the Necronomicon, and all the undead magic he could muster to make himself nigh unkillable. But this is where I think the story would take a drastic change in events. Getting in close, Martin would take aim with his sword and cut the Necronomicon in half. Being a sentient artifact, the Necronomicon would activate a failsafe to keep from being destroyed, and begin absorbing the life force of the person who carries it, namely Jack. The book would be mended and emblazoned with Jack's stretched and screaming face. It would be collected by one of Martin's teachers and sealed, sent as far away as possible in hopes it would never return. The rest of the events would play out as expected. At the end of Phantom Blood, Jonathan and Irina got married and had a child. They went on a cruise, but Dio wasn't done with them and attacked the ship. In a last-ditch effort to save the life of his wife and his unborn child, Jonathan sacrificed himself to defeat Dio. Irina goes on to birth George Joestar II, the father of Joseph Joestar, and the protagonist of JoJo Part 2, Battle Tendencies. There are a lot of similarities, even in our series canon, between Jack and Dio, to Jonathan and Martin. Jack and Dio both come from London and were raised in poverty by their fathers. However, Dario lived a life of crime, where Henry was poor because he was pious, and gave much of their family belongings to the church. I'll get into that a little more when we talk about Jack's bingo book. But Jonathan and Martin both aim to be the best sort of gentlemen they can be because of their fathers. George Joestar, Jonathan's father, was a rich landowner, and raised both Dio and Jonathan to exhibit good manners. While I could say that as far as etiquette goes, Jack and Dio are more versed than Martin and Jonathan, the kindness that they show to other people couldn't be further from opposite. Dio is selfish and a sociopath. Jonathan is giving to a fault, and it almost stops him from finishing Dio on several occasions in his youth. Dio will stop at nothing to ruin Jonathan's life, only playing nice when he feels he can get ahead of him. Jack has pulled similar schemes on Martin in various different timelines. Yeah, timelines. Keep in mind that time travel and the multiverse are major players in our series. I mean, how do you think I get these videos from 500 years in the future? Dio's Stone Mask and Jack's Necronomicon both have the capacity of turning regular humans into the undead, and both of them feed off the life force of their users. While this isn't necessarily a stated factor of H.P. Lovecraft's lore of the Necronomicon, I also like to factor in some other ways it's been used, like with the Evil Dead series. However, there are some key differences as well. While Jonathan has an interest in archaeology, Martin's vocation goes more toward finances and economics. Dio specialized in law, but Jack focuses on the arcane, religion, and forbidden magic. Martin gets his sword from his father, Matthias. Jonathan gets his sword from Baron Zabelli. However, both of their swords have names. Jonathan names his sword Pluck, but Martin's sword is named Madameo. Hammon, the spiritual energy that Jonathan utilizes the power of the sun in order to do wonderful and miraculous things. Hammon can heal, burn, break. Cells filled with Hammon are strong to their absolute peak. While Martin can utilize the power of the sun as a source for his mastery over fire, the other elements must come from an outside source and almost work like asking permission from energies to be utilized. Now that's because of the 7 keepers.
Acne!
Whoops! Anyway, in order to bring one's body to the peak of perfection like Jonathan does, Martin would have to utilize spirit magic. Spirit magic has everything to do with the mind, the body, and everything related to the humankind, like technology. I mean, that is Martin's second most powerful element. Just like you, Bree. However, I think one of my favorite parallels about Jonathan and Martin is how they both square off against a vampire, and it's a battle that really represents a turning point. Remember that hero's journey, the monomyth, and I'd place that event right about here. Now, of course, that's just the first cycle of Martin's true quest for heroism. There's still a lot more growing up, grief, loss, wins, and failure he'll have to face along the way before he's anywhere near close to besting an enemy that even now only lurks in the shadows, watching his every move, planning exactly how and when he'll step in and rip everything that Martin holds dear. Dio's rivalry with Jonathan reached a peak, and it had to do with this scene. That's Irina Pendleton. Irina is a girl from Jonathan's hometown, and she's also Jonathan's love interest. When this happened, Irina didn't just wilt though. She started washing her face off in a dirty puddle, and then she gives Dio this look. And he loses it. That look of defiance told Dio what Irina was thinking, that she'd rather wash her face with mud than kiss someone like Dio. See, it was Dio's aim to spoil Irina for Jonathan. He explicitly tells us this through his thoughts. When Irina sees Jonathan next, she's so ashamed that she runs from him, and a bunch of Dio's friends mockingly tell Jonathan what happened. But Jonathan's a real Chad. He doesn't hold any of this against Irina and immediately recognizes Dio as the threat. He tries to go and defend Irina's honor, and it doesn't go well at first. Dio has spent all of Jonathan's life as a bully, keeping him under thumb, but Jonathan's true virtue here lies not in trying to take revenge for Dio coming in between he and Irina's relationship. It's because Dio insulted Irina. He wants to punish Dio for the disrespect he paid to a woman by forcing a kiss on her. So understand that when I say this is because of purity culture, it's not because of what Jonathan believes necessarily, but what Irina feels and what Dio tried to use against her. But that's the concept of a sacred first kiss. This is a Japanese cultural trope. Whether they're a boy or a girl, a Japanese teen's first adult kiss on the lips is a momentous occasion. It's something to be built up to and shared with a very special person. Something that is remembered for the rest of one's life. A spoiled or stolen first kiss is an occasion for profound angst, and even anger. Consequently, in any anime plotline involving teen romance, the first kiss is an important milestone in the development of both the self and the relationship. And this is mostly because, unlike most Western countries where kissing is between moderately special and outright mundane, kissing is seen as an extraordinarily intimate act in Japan, almost comparable in intimacy to intercourse in the West. And in some parts of Japan, kissing is seen even more intimate than intercourse. It's just not done in public, and anime characters who do kiss in public are either shameless, extremely daring, American, or censored from the audience's view. Parents don't even kiss where their children can see them. In effect, the first kiss is the harbinger of teens' entry into full adult maturity. We see that first in Irina's anger at Dio, but then later, when Jonathan sees Irina, she's still deeply affected by what happened, and continues to avoid Jonathan out of fear of rejection. Measuring how our characters would respond to this situation, mixed with Irina's normally cheery, upbeat, and kind nature, I thought it'd be most fitting to be Aimel. Not only would Madeline not react the same way Irina did, she'd be more prone to get physical, even with a guy like Dio, but she would have gone to Jonathan about it immediately. For each of these poses, I want to do something iconic, and well, since Irina is a side character, she doesn't have a whole lot in the way of iconography. There's the kiss, which also involved Dio, but then there's also this scene where she and Jonathan first meet. It's a moment that actually tells you a lot about Irina's character. She's kind but shy, innocent and sweet. If that just doesn't scream Aimel, I don't know what would. But then I ran into a problem. This basket that Aimel is filled with berries. Well, in Phantom Blood they were grapes, but I saw an opportunity to include something a little more locally Scottish. These are blueberries. Nope, not blueberries, as blueberries aren't native to Scotland. The Highlands have another type of berry that usually grows in a dense carpet on the woodland floor, and it's also the type of berry that often gets added to mead. Given that, I wanted to make a small nudge back to our episode of Saturnalia, where picking frozen berries was one of the activities that Aimel suggested to Martin. Something I had to think a lot about was the difference in art styles between the different parts of JoJo. Despite Irina, Jonathan, and Dio mostly being Part 1 characters, the shading and colors were a bit different. However, we had them drawn in a more up-to-date JoJo style, around the start of Part 5 with Golden Wind. So I looked at Trish for that, and one of the things I noticed right away was the eyes. I jumped to Part 6, Stone Ocean, to have a look at Jolene. The eyes are still kind of dark, but with a thick black line on the outside, it isn't quite as pronounced. Given that this is done to make Jolene seem a bit more tomboyish, I think they work better for Madeline. Then I looked at Lisa. Despite being Part 2, I liked the sort of shading for Aimel's eyes specifically to go with the Part 5 style, so let's try that out. I think this looks great. She's super cute and translates awesomely between our style and Araki. This background though, that comes from Sammy, our comic artist, and the person who does the illustrations for all of our episodes. Aaron has spent hours working on JoJo's wounds after his fight with Dio, and in a very similar fashion, Aimel is the person who helps heal Martin's spirits when he is in his darkest time. Well, there they are, all three of them, The story concluded, but if I decide to do this again, I know just who I get to dress as Joseph Joestar. He even wears a scarf. Alright, 3 arts in 1 video again, and now I feel like I'm undead. That's it. I'm forsaking my humanity, Bree! Just kidding. Art for this week was Narufumi on Fiverr. They specialize in a lot of different art styles, and this JoJo style was perfect for our purpose. I'll put a link down in the description below. But before you go, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring my bell. Help me grow in the algorithm so more people can find Tales of Atonement. Art for this channel wouldn't even be possible, however, without the help of our patrons. Monetization on YouTube is not enough to keep us going, so please follow the Patreon link down in the description to help Tales of Atonement keep going long term. We have a lot left to do and a big story to tell, and we simply can't do it without your help. Besides, there's a ton of extras only available on Patreon that won't be available for months on YouTube, if ever. Some of our great patrons include Pammy Poo, Shadow Fox, Arya Gamari, Charles Tam, Jace Moreland, and Lunder Lumen. Thank you all for watching and supporting our story.